First of all, I would like to thank the directors of the Berlin International Economics Congress for inviting me to deliver a presentation here today. It's my hope that my presentation, along with theirs, will benefit to the discussion of the important theme of this conference, the role of the global politics and civil society in an international economy. My presentation will fall into the area of the role of politics, generally speaking, and will particularly focus on the adoption of protectionist policy as a response to the economic downturn facing the world today. My opinion on the matter, as I will elaborate on in the following, is summarized in the chosen title you can see behind me for this presentation. What stands as a historical fact stands today. State aid offers no bridge over troubled waters. But what do we see among politicians in Europe today and other places? Politicians are very good to be re-elected, and somebody thinks that state aid can handle and solve our crisis, but it can't. Now, before I turn to talk about state aid, let me begin my presentation by offering you my view of the conditions facing businesses and industry today as it defines the condition on which we have to act politically in order to overcome this economic crisis. I can say that, also mentioned, I served as a Danish Minister for Economy and Business Affairs. I mentioned my job as Minister for Growth, a position I held from 2001 to 2008, and had really the opportunity to head many delegations of Danish business owners and also entrepreneurs to countries around the globe. A lot of Danish businessmen joined me from Russia, Korea, Japan, China, Vietnam, India, Brazil, Chile, Mexico, and the States. And as you see here, what I have learned during these years is that we live in a truly globalized economy where the opportunities for businesses and therefore also the challenges are no longer bound by borders. The world, not the state we reside in, is now our domestic market. It's difficult to understand, and today Germany is still our biggest export partner from Denmark. But often it's cheaper to get a bottle of wine from South Africa to Denmark than it is to get a bottle of wine from Germany to Denmark. Globalization, understood as the evolution towards a borderless world characterized by the near-perfect mobility of the factors production has gained, acceptance with more depth, width, and speed that we can imagine. What has happened since the 90s? When we speak about our economies, when we speak about business, and let me point two factors who led me to this conclusion. Firstly, the price of transportation has gone down thanks to technological developments, making distance between the production side and the sales market far, far more cost-effective. It has improved conditions for trade. Transportation by sea is by far the most used mode of transport when it comes to trade between the EU and the other countries. And we're talking about the world economy. I think it's not nearly close to 90% of the world economy transported by ships. In my time as a minister, I was also responsible for the merchant fleet in Denmark, and we transport about 25% of the exports out of China and about 10% of the shipping all over the world. So the price for transportation by sea has seen a steadily decline since 1920. The cost of transporting a bicycle from Thailand to the UK in a container today is only a few dollars. Shipping a DVD player from Asia to Europe costs roughly $1.50. A kilogram of coffee just about 15 cents. And secondly, prices on communication have also gone down. New technology and speedy internet connection have made it possible to transfer large amounts of data across the globe to a very, very little cost. To tell you a little story, 15 years ago when my son was living in the States for 1 year, we phoned him every Friday evening. It cost us about €3 per minute to have a speech to the US. So little sister, father and mother was talking very fast Friday evening and then on again. Okay? Only a few years after, my youngest daughter went to Australia. She phoned me one Saturday when I was sitting on my tractor on my little farm in the middle of Denmark. And she called me when I was driving out in the fields. And I took my mobile phone. It was my daughter calling me from the northern part, northeast of Australia. She was walking her feet in Great Barrier Reef. And I said, God, Sarah, it's extremely expensive to call me. No, Dad, she said, it cost me about 20 cents. Australian cents is about 1 kroner. It's nothing. 1/3 or 1/7 of a euro. Only a few cents per minute. She has bought a little card for her mobile phone, so she calls her father. Then she came home and finalized her pre-university. And instead of starting her studies, she traveled again. 2 years after, she phoned me from Sydney. And now she is studying. But at that time, she called me and said, Dad, take it to be a little more modern. I have Skype now. Call me in Skype. You see what has happened in a few years. And that's a part what we are fighting. That's a part of the challenges of today. So, when we're speaking about transportation, when we're speaking about communication, it do not cost anything anymore compared with the prices of the product. See, that was only 2 examples of the effect of globalization. And hopefully I've given you some meaning of the concept, thus avoiding diluting it. The second point that I want to make in relation to globalization is point to what I like to term globalization 2.0. In Denmark, as in other countries, we have experienced globalization 1.0. More than 30 years back in Denmark, we had a large textile industry, but around that many times factories were shut down and production was moved first to East European countries, such as Poland, then to Asia, to China, Vietnam, and across the Atlantic to Mexico. And many countries have similar stories to report. This is globalization 1.0 outsourcing. And when I served as a minister, we had problems in the EU with quotas for textile from China. And I called my minister colleagues in Spain and Italy. I said, what's going on? It's Bendt from Denmark. And why do you have this politics that we need quotas from the Far East? And they told me, Bendt, I have 2 textile factories in my constituency, and I have to be re-elected. How can I have another politics in that area? So that's what we work with. Moving to globalization 2.0 marks the movement from made in China to created in China. Headed to become possibly the largest economy in the world, and with the ability to provide a large and a relatively cheap workforce. China today is the driving force behind globalization, not a bystander. This is the world of today, as I see it. What I have just presented offers a logic of no alternative. This is the reality in which we have to act politically. With globalization, both winners and losers. The prevailing actors in the age of globalization will be those capable for adapting to realities and implement change. Those who think differently and act accordingly. That's what I think is very, very important. When traveling around the world, I've told you about no prices for transport. You know, you can hire the labor force 1 hour in China for among $1 to $2. Are you going to Vietnam? $1. Going to Mexico, oh, it's a little bit cheap, more expensive. Then we are close to $3 to $4. But there are free markets from Mexico to North America and also to Latin America and into the EU. So therefore, Danish business owners are moving their machines from the Danish factories to Mexico, serving the American market. That's why they survive. On the basis of these circumstances, I want to put special attention on the way that many states in Europe, as well as in the world, have acted lately during the financial, economic and social crisis. Desperate times call for desperate measures. It's often said. The desperate measure in this case is the spread of state aid schemes imposed by governments as a way of saving and maintaining jobs nationally. Unemployment in the Eurozone has hit 10% despite the rebound of some of Europe's largest economies. That's not the worst thing when I look at it. When you see the young people in Spain, the unemployment rate is near to 40%. Are we going to Latvia? It's about 36%. I understand that the rationale behind the protectionist approach, attempting to shift demand away from imported goods and onto domestically produced goods in order to save jobs in a time of crisis. One can only expect such reaction on an external threat as we have seen happen before. But the outcome of the protectionist policy is only to support an ineffective domestic industry that perhaps on a later occasion will have to shut down. History shows us that protectionism damages a country's ability to compete with others, and it damages a country's chance of development. Let me give you just a few examples of protectionist policy and state aid schemes as it has involved during this crisis. In December 2008, temporary clauses were added to the rules concerning state aid within the EU. State aid is generally looked at badly by the EU as it violates basic common market principles such as fair competition. But new clauses were added to ease access to financing. These new clauses have given member states permission to increase the state aid aimed directly at the businesses with reference to the economic crisis. While I'm fully aware of the necessity of properly working banking sector we have seen, unfortunately, too much money used to fund state aid schemes that are basically unreasonable and considerable. State aid has been given to the automobile industry, to transportation, shipping industries, and the greenhouse sectors, just to name a few. While I entered this European Parliament, some of the non-European Danes said, "Oh, that's new European states, forget it." I've never seen so many national politicians gathered at the same place. Because I was sitting at the plenary in Strasbourg listening to reconstruction of the automobile sector. Okay. The spokesman for the Conservatives, spokesman for the Socialists, spokesman for the liberals, spokesman for all the others. What were very, very interesting, all the political groups have pointed out their spokesman. That were Germans, all of them. So they could agree what we were discussing. So it's just one. Germany is not worse than others. So we see it in Europe at the moment. And my point of view is Europe producing more cars than we can sell. Then stop it. And use our minds and anything else to create something new, create some with more values if we can't compete in car production. So it's really easy because state aid, there's no bridge over troubled water. And the overall level of state aid measured a percentage of GDP within the EU rose to 2% in 2008. That's 4 times higher than the year before. And you can see this from this chart drafted by the Commission. The level of state aid has been at more or less constant level since 1992, only rising dramatically in 2008. I just spoke of. This number includes aid given to the financial sector, of course. Countries outside Europe have also indulged protectionist measures as well. In the United States, who can't remember Mr. Obama, Buy American clause was presented a year ago as part of the economic recovery plan. The EU, along with others, rightfully criticized the clause as it sought to ensure that only the US-made steel, iron, and manufactured goods were used in projects funded by $800 billion bill. I was pleased to see that the clause did not pass the Senate in its original form. Most recently, China has introduced a new regulation favoring Chinese-made products in the public sector contracts. It's quite new, only a few months old. As it reads in the current form, it has not been adopted yet. In favors of computers and related equipment, communication units, office supplies, computer software, and new energy technology and energy efficiency products produced in China. This new initiative appears to even encompass foreign subsidiary companies placed in China, and so it may affect directly European or other countries' businesses if these, for instance, owns their factories placed in China. So every time there's a public procurement in China in these issues, then they will take their own. Both the Buy American and this new Buy Chinese schemes are examples of protectionism. They remind us that we need to be aware that protectionism today does not necessarily present itself in the way it did during the 1930s economic crisis. Back then, at that time, the duties and quotas were most used form for protectionist policy. Today the policy is less obvious, but I believe equally damaging as we have seen with the American and Chinese initiatives. Protectionism presents itself when there is a crisis. World trade stalled due to protectionist policy. Ships were laid up. There was no cargo to trade. If I read back in the Danish history of business, in 1930s, one of our old good shipping companies have laid up 45% of their tonnage. So can it happen again? I don't know. The trade decline we have experienced during this current crisis, a drop of 9% in 2009, according to the WTO, has of course been affected by other factors apart from protectionist policies such as reduces demand, decline in the prices, what we also heard from Estonia, and also reduced demand for energy, raw materials, and also the drying up of short-term finance for businesses. But protectionism policy has added to this further worsening of the crisis, and it's likely to have postponed recovery. Let me therefore point a few more trends. The European Commission, in its latest report on potentially trade restrictive measures put out by the DG Trade, concludes that in all, in October 2009, roughly 223 trade restrictive measures were reported as planned or introduced since October 2008 by the EU major trade partners. I'll say this number is of great concern, although, as the Commission also points out, these measures are relatively limited in the scope compared to previous experiences with economic downturns. So I'm pleased to discover that we did something to learn from history later. The report also states that protectionist measures are not part of a coherent policy mix for economic recovery. Indeed, by keeping markets open and trade flowing, that the prospects for a rapid return to economic growth and prosperity are maximized. In its third and latest Global Trade Alert report for the Center of Economic Policy Research concludes that although many economies have rebounded in the second half of 2009, protectionist pressures have no relented. The report concludes that governments of the world have all in all implemented 297 protectionist policy measures since November 2008, and more are to come. But Denmark, and I should add that most developed countries have the designers, the business talent and logistics, but we can't compete on the price of labor. And I need to say to some of you that we have had a lot of problems in Denmark at the moment also. We are not the country, we are good in many of the drafts you see here, but this crisis in Denmark can also be even deeper than we have seen. Why? We are proud of our flexicurity. We pay really big benefits, unemployment rates, but at this moment, also the unemployment rate in Denmark goes up, and it costs a lot of money. We have had a surplus in our national budgets. We have no foreign debt, etc. What we see now is that our deficit for the national budgets will go for a surplus to about minus 5% of the GDP. So there's no doubt about that also, even we think that we have done well for a lot of years, we'll face problems in the future. So back to this state aid. All these numbers and stated measures which I have told you about, I believe a point in the same direction, and call attention to the following. There will have to be some time, and it is soon for whole Europe. I think a wake-up call for Europe. Believing that one can protect an effective business from competition is a mistake. Instead, we need to spend more money for education, research, and innovation in order to add value to our products. But we can't compete with India, Pakistan, Vietnam, Mexico, and others on the price of labor, and we shan't do it. In the future Europe, we must feed on our ability to add value to our products. To put it bluntly, we need to get real. We need to act on the reality in its present itself. Otherwise, Europe will find itself outpaced by some stronger and more skillful. Adaptation and understanding the premises of globalization is, in my point of view, crucial. I spoke earlier of the textile industry, once a substantial industry in my own country. Today we have a Danish company called Bestseller, a spearhead of Danish fashion design with close to 3,000 retailer shops in China. And it's also this company expanding in the European market. They have about 400 retailer shops in Europe. In 2 years, they will have 1,000 retailer shops in Europe. That's the brand, Jack and Jones, Veremoda, Only, Selected, whatever it's called, the same all over the world. They do not see in Denmark, with high wages, they do not see globalization as a fear. They see it as a challenge to markets where people are earning more and more money. So therefore, when we speak about this textile industry in Denmark, so Denmark has no longer any sewing rooms necessary to fit such a production. All sheet, jeans, dresses, and so on are produced outside the borders. All of them. But they have said we had to give more value in the products, so therefore we have educated designers and people who can make business and also talent for logistics. Because, once again, we shall not in Europe compete on the prices of labor. Let me offer you another example. In 2012, we, as I have mentioned for you, we are an old shipping nation in Denmark. We are building ships since the Viking pushed the ships in the sea. Somebody remember us for that time, not for something good, because the Danes, they raped and stole everywhere in Europe. But in 2012, we will close the last shipbuilding yard in Denmark, currently employing more than 2,500 workers today. It will be closed. Why this step? Because the price of building a big container ship in Denmark is about $25 million more than it costs to build it in China. Every single ship built in Denmark, going out in the world, and probably working from US to China, China to US, US to China for years. They will have to pay the interest on that competition with others when it hits when this new building hits the sea. So therefore, no, we can't build ships anymore in Denmark. It's over and over. And we have to educate our people to do other businesses because of the wages. And the same applies to Europe. When European consumers do not want to buy European-made cars, then we ought to question again the wisdom of pouring money into this industry. I think we are throwing good money after bad money. And the same applies to the common agriculture policy. In the European Parliament, and probably also in the Council, there is a general support behind aiding the agriculture. This aid of European farmers accounts for 40% of the EU budget. Of course, I know that the EU budget is only 1% of the GDP. But when we now only have 1% of the GDP in Europe to run the EU, shall we then use 40% for agriculture? I think it's crazy. Why do we not use those money for education, research, development? We need to use the money in that way. What has been the strategy for Europe? The old Lisbon strategy, we can call it now, has failed to accomplish its goals. I still remember the words. We shall be the most competitive and knowledge-based economy in 2010. It's a big joke. The fact only stresses the need for Europe to stand firm and stand together by further growing and developing on our common market. It needs developing when it comes to harmonizing standards, especially in terms of service. This is the path for Europe must take. Europe should not resolve to protectionist policy. We gain nothing. We risk keeping industries up and running only to see them shut down on a later occasion. Looking back on a failed Lisbon strategy, let me, as way of ending my presentation, turn and look forward, because I'm not a pessimist. I'm really an optimist. We have so many values in our part of the world, we just have to use it. It is so that the new Commission will take office now on Tuesday. We will vote for them on Tuesday. And then we'll present the EU 2020 strategy. The Commission has so far presented a consultation paper on the future that replaced the Lisbon strategy. As I have pointed to the need of the creating businesses and industry that can compete in the global markets, a common strategy for development of the European Union as it approaches the year 2020 is utmost importance. Even though many, including myself, have pointed to the failures of the Lisbon strategy, I still believe in the need for such a strategy in the years to come. The Lisbon strategy has failed due to ineffective coordination and lack of political ownership by national governments. The so-called open method of coordination, based on a competition for performance, has not provided the incentives, or benchmarking is needed. The failures of the Lisbon strategy need to be dealt with in the new strategy. The proposal for the next strategy for the EU, the Commission states that it wants to create a greener and more intelligent economy, a European Union that will lead, compete, and develop a knowledge-based economy. To achieve the goal of the Commission calls for, among other things, may not be reached the levels of previous economic downturns, such as in the 30s, but water needs not to boil to scald. In Europe, we must adapt to reality and put our hearts and minds in areas where we can compete and take a lead. This means investing, once again I must say it, more in education, research and innovation, and trashing the illusion that the state will do the trick. It won't. I really think when we look around Europe, we have a lot of very, very good companies who are leading when we are speaking about environmental technologies, green tech, etc. So, of course, we have something to give to the rest of the world. And I think the first region in the world who can handle this new challenge we are looking about climate changes, new green jobs, and in some decades we shall not be so independent of fossil fuels as we are today. We are becoming more and more dependent on Mr. Putin and his gas for the European industries. We are becoming more and more dependent of crude oil from the Middle East. And therefore we have to develop new technologies so we can be rid of that. And it can be solar energy. It can be windmills. It can be biofuels, second generation, not first generation, etc. There's a lot of opportunities, and I think when you are looking at, when I was born, we were 2.5 billion citizens at this world. Now we are 6, and in 2050 we'll gain about 9. And there's one word all of us had to remember, that's sustainability. Sustainability is the key word, and it will be the buzzword also to compete and to create more prosper for Europe and for all of us. So this is just to tell to you before I leave for Denmark that I do not believe in state aid. Many of our colleagues in the European Parliament believe in that. I don't believe it that. We had to look at the history, and we know the result of state aid. There's no way forward when we speak about that. Thank you.